So, the remote play feature is sort of hit or miss for a lot of gamers out there. I've heard reports of people getting this to work outside the country on business trips, while some people can't even get it to run for more than 2 minutes in the same room without losing connection. Due to what's happening around the world right now, I won't be able to show you how remote play operates outside the country. I can, however, show you how it operates in my living room, which is about 20 to 25 feet away from the PlayStation 4. I've decided to focus less on reviewing the games this time around and just look at the usability of the feature instead. Now, it's obvious your mileage can vary, so on-screen results will look different. These are just the results I was able to achieve with my setup. Here are 10 PS4 games that work best using remote play on the PS Vita. Number 10. God of War 3 Remastered. For such an intense game, you think remote play would be a waste of time. Quite the opposite, really. God of War 3 Remastered plays rather well on the PS Vita through remote play. But if I may suggest that you put the difficulty on easy, left trigger is used for blocking, and the right is used for opening chests. The R2 is magic, which is mapped to the top left of the front touch. It worked well for the most part, and surprisingly doesn't get in the way of the action. There were a few instances where I brought up photo mode by accident, which is right below the spot you press for magic. I think if you're aware of what you're doing, then this shouldn't be a reoccurring problem. The biggest issue I have with the remote play feature are some of the bigger action set pieces. The camera pulls all the way back in order for you to see the action, which looks great on a bigger display, but for the Vita's 5-inch screen, things are a little harder to make out. If it's your first time playing God of War 3, you might be a little lost when the action starts to get a little crazy. I already played it back on the PS3, so I sort of had a general idea of where to go. Given its simple control scheme, I don't think it's any different from God of War on the PSP or the excellent port of God of War Collection on PS Vita. Combos aren't too complicated either. If you can remember the combination square square triangle with the occasional magic spell, then you're pretty much set. Give it a go and see how the original God of War trilogy ends. By the way, here's a pro tip. L3 and R3 are the left and right bottom corners of the front touch. Number 9. Uncharted, the Nathan Drake Collection. Now, the remote play on this wasn't quite as smooth as God of War 3. Sometimes it would be okay, but then there were times when the image would start to cut out. I found that reloading the game entirely did help a bit. And before you even start, make sure you swap the L1 and R1 buttons for aiming and shooting. I also bumped up the brightness to full, just because the OLED makes everything look a little darker than they really are. And I'm not sure if this makes a difference, but I turned off motion blur as well. The game worked for the most part. Control was easy, and reloading is now done with the R2, which, if you swap the controls earlier, is now mapped to the bottom right of the front touch. The aiming isn't too bad, although it would be better if the connection was a little more consistent. Although it's not perfect, Drake Collection does work through remote play. Number 8. Strider. I cannot believe how smoothly this ran through remote play. Is there a full moon out? I wasn't expecting much considering how fast-paced the game is, but to my surprise, the connection managed to keep up. There were occasional skipping, but for the majority of the time, the image was pretty solid as you can see here. I will admit there was a slight input delay when jumping, which for some reason resolved itself the longer I played. Maybe the connection took a few minutes to stabilize? I don't know. All I know is that I was having a blast. Later parts of the game can get a little dark, so I suggest bumping up the brightness to max. The controls are a breeze. You'll be mashing the attack button most of the time. I don't think there's too much requirement from the L2 and R2 buttons. I actually had someone else in the house using the internet, so I'm guessing the connection doesn't have to be perfect. This is one game that's gonna surprise a lot of people through remote play. Number 7. Batman, the Telltale series. I played Strider previously with someone else using the internet, and it ran close to perfect. Batman, on the other hand, had no one else tying up the connection and was just barely able to keep afloat. I'm not sure if it's because of the fact that there's an online multiplayer component causing the game to require a faster connection, but the entire thing ran less than stellar, to be honest. Thank goodness most of the gameplay are single button presses and scripted events. If it was anything like the open world Arkham games, then we'd be in some trouble. The controls translate well over to the PlayStation Vita. The only issue I encountered were the ones that involve the R2 button. It's mapped to the top right of the front touch, and it's used often in combination with the face buttons during QuickTime events. You're gonna have to lift your index finger off the right trigger to pull most of these off. Not intuitive, but at least the game gives you endless opportunities to pull it off. You could do better, but given the nature of point-and-click adventure games, Batman, the Telltale series is definitely playable on the PS Vita. Number 6. Final Fantasy VII Remake. Before I talk about the remote play, let me just say that this game looks phenomenal. Like, I would say this looks better than Advent Children. Looking at this game just makes me realize how far video games have come. Remember back when the characters looked like Legos? I also have to mention the new combat system. It's sort of like Kingdom Hearts with its hack and slash type gameplay combined with the active time battle system from the original Final Fantasy VII. It's a little bit of the old with a little bit of the new. I think it works perfectly. I don't know what everyone else is complaining about. Like, were people expecting this to play like Devil May Cry or something? Because if that's the case, then here's a little tip. Go play Devil May Cry. Regarding the remote play, I can definitely see myself playing this game all the way through to the end. The connection was steady for the most part, with only a few moments of image breakup. The controls seemed pretty simple enough. The only time I had to use the front touch was to lock onto my target. Other than that, there shouldn't be too much of an issue playing this on your Vita. One problem I did encounter was the size of the on-screen text. They're not very clear, and on a smaller screen, some of the lines tend to bleed together. It's not impossible to read, but it's definitely not something you can see at a glance. More veteran gamers might have a problem here. Number 5. Dirt Rally 2. Or is it 2.0? Now, the first thing that caught my attention about this game was the fact that it notified me that I was playing on a PlayStation Vita. The second thing is that the controls are completely customizable. Now, that's a first. Up until this point, the only thing I thought you could customize for remote play was to swap the L1 and R1 buttons. The image quality was pretty consistent throughout. There were instances of image breakup and distortion, but for the most part, I thought it looked pretty good. Now, I'm not the biggest rally person, so you have to excuse my horrible gameplay, and also for playing on automatic. Thanks to the customizable controls, the game performed very well, at least to the best of my knowledge. Right trigger to accelerate and left trigger for the brakes. There's a button on there for the clutch. Is that what they call it? My biggest issue is that since the acceleration is now mapped to the Vita's right trigger, you won't be able to control the amount of pressure applied. Since you no longer have the analog button, you have to resort to just feathering the gas. I mean, it works, but I think there's a slight loss of precision because of that. But then again, what are we complaining about? It's remote play on the PS Vita. Number 4. Steep. Another game that works pretty well with remote play. The R2 is mapped to the right of the back touch, just in case you're wondering. There's not much else that's required from the controls, so you should be okay with the Vita's default setup. I was a little worried the on-screen text would be difficult to read, but surprisingly they're not. They're small, but they're still legible. Image quality was solid for the most part, although it appeared to get worse as I got further down the mountain. Kind of strange, but whatever. And because the game takes place on top of a mountain, you won't have any need to adjust the brightness on the Vita screen. Whereas most other games looked overly dark, Steep takes full advantage of the Vita's OLED screen. Number 3. Shadow of the Colossus. Okay, so just some minor tweaks I suggest you make before jumping in. Change the controls to classic, which will require you to use less of the L2 and R2. I think all you need it for is to focus on the Colossus, not much other than that. Also, I turned the motion blur all the way down, and if the screen is too dark, then you can also adjust the brightness as well. By the way, the front touch is used to bring up the map. Other than that, I found Shadow of the Colossus an absolute joy to play on the PS Vita. I took down the first Colossus with ease and was tempted to forget about this video and just continue playing. I had tried playing this game before through remote play and had a rather difficult time. Little did I know, with a few simple control tweaks, the game is now playable. I think the reason why this game works so well on the Vita is that it has such a simple objective. Find the Colossus and kill it. And the target on the Colossus is pretty hard to miss as well, so it's not like you need pinpoint accuracy. Then again, there were some parts that required you to aim that arrow in a very specific location. Oh well, I guess you can worry about it when you get to it. If you haven't played this game yet, then now's the perfect time. Number 2. Shenmue. Love it or hate it, you have to admit this is one game that was meant to be played on the PS Vita. The controls are almost perfect. Almost. I don't know why they couldn't have made the right trigger run and the left to look at objects. Instead, it's used to navigate the menus. What you have to do now is use the back touch, which I will admit isn't very accurate. Luckily, this isn't one of those games that requires exact precision. The opening of the game might be a little frustrating. Moving your character wasn't that intuitive back on the Dreamcast, and it's not very much different here. It feels rather clumsy by today's standards, but give it some time. There's just a slight learning curve. Also, if you got one of those horror-y grip things, then this is the place to use it. May I also say that this game looks great on the OLED screen. There were some instances where I thought the game was running straight off a cartridge. It's not going to win any awards, and you pretty much know by now if you're a fan of the franchise, but if you are, then this is an excellent way to revisit Shenmue. Number 1. Resident Evil. By far, one of the best games to remote play on the PS Vita. Just make sure you're using the control type B and that you bump the brightness all the way up, because this game is dark. The good thing about the PS4 remaster is that you can now control your character freely, in that you're no longer restricted to the tank controls of the previous games. There is a small issue when the camera changes, as you'll have to adjust the direction your character is facing, but other than that, moving around the environment is a breeze. Aiming is done with the right trigger, changing targets is done with the left, and all the face buttons work as they should. L2 is for secondary weapons, which is mapped to the bottom left of the front touch. It's not used often, but it is responsive when you need it. The remote play for this works so well, I almost want to forgive the horrible port of Revelations 2 on PS Vita. Now, these are just a few of the games I was able to try out. Feel free to leave your suggestions down in the comments below. And if you want to see more awesome PlayStation Vita content, then make sure you click the links on the screen or the ones that are pinned down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.